Hello and welcome to another edition of your favourite pricing podcast, which is of course Pricing College, with your hosts Aidan Campbell
and Joanna Wells.
I was actually going to say and Joanna Wells as well. A monologue. In today's episode we are going to discuss who we think listens to our podcast, or I suppose even who we think it's aimed at. So we'll let Joanna kick off.
Well, let's think about this. I mean, I think about this in terms of like the feedback and the questions that we've got in the past, and who's been asking them. So essentially, I think it's kind of considered a niche pricing, but it's a growing area for businesses. So what we're seeing is a lot of smaller businesses who potentially have listened to the podcast and have thought, oh, okay, this is not what I'm doing, this value-based stuff. It sounds good. It sounds exactly what I need. Don't know much about it. I think I want to, learn a bit more. So we've got that learning audience there with the smaller business owners. And then we've got a very niche audience, specialised knowledge in terms of pricing managers who have worked in the industry. Obviously, I've built up hundreds of good relationships and connections with the pricing community. So obviously I have a following there. And, they often comment and give me questions about various things. So they obviously are keen listeners. And I think they're approaching it in two ways. In some way, it's a little bit like, yes, this is exactly what we experience, these problems and challenges, what we experience in businesses. It's great to hear this, other people discussing these problems. And equally, we've got people that are new to the industry or are noticing things are changing around them, and they're keen to learn kind of what's happening in the pricing and revenue management world. And then finally, I suppose the other group would be sort of more experienced, seasoned leaders and executives, CEOs of major businesses that we commonly work with through our consulting and strategic recruitment services. So they would be keen to hear, obviously, the insights, the latest news, what's happening, risk mitigation, what not to do, and key developments in the pricing world, specifically to their industry. So that, Aidan, is kind of where I think our listeners come from.
Yeah, I think they will. I suppose, when you're looking at podcasts, and I suppose we've been looking at the numbers of how many listeners, on this podcast, fundamentally, it's a niche. We're probably around about 1,000 listens a month, I think, unique listens. And it's a very niche area. I think, pricing, how many pricers are out there? How many pricing professionals are there? There aren't that many, let's be honest. There aren't that many. And then obviously, of the few that there are, how many listen to our podcast? We can't assume it's 100% coverage. But if you're not listening, why not? I need a good reason. But I suppose so that those are the professionals. But I think, and we've had feedback, a lot of people are small business owners, startup owners. People have approached us saying, I've got this new business idea, but I have no idea how to charge for it. And it's I suppose what we're trying to do is give people that light bulb moment, almost like that, Paul on the road to the Damascus concept, where you get a flash of, you realize pricing exists. You sort of realize that there is a profession, there is an expertise, there is, a subject area that you probably didn't know about. And I was like that once. I just assumed probably cost plus was the way you do it. But I suppose when we're discussing things, I'd also say what podcasts do we listen to? Do I listen to? I listen to quite a few. From a business perspective, not that many. One we do listen to, I listen to is Marketing School with Neil Patel and Eric Sue, which covers modern marketing stuff. And I suppose their format's quite different. They do it once a day, every day, but you pick up little nuggets. And it gets you in that mindset that you're constantly thinking about that. There's lots of other ones I would like to listen to if they were available. And I suppose we're trying to fill that gap for pricing. And, I suppose, and we've also covered on this podcast, it isn't really just pricing. That's what we call it. But in reality, it is commercial strategy. It's actually charging and making money for your business.
Yeah, I think that's right. I I think when you think of pricing, literally just as a number or as an event, oh, I'm going to change these prices, I'm going to set a price for a new product, or what price do I charge? It's at that point, really, that you think, you know what, pricing, it's not as difficult as just like setting a number. It's integrated with a whole number of different information and data sources, different, I suppose, approaches. And you think, it's highly connected to my customer base. I didn't realize that. It brings up a lot of questions when you're setting price. And often people think about pricing in a very tactical sense. So they think, I can do that really quickly. And that's the feedback we've got from listeners. They go, until I listened to your podcast, I was thinking, I can just quickly tack on pricing at the end of the list of chores that I've got to do at the end of the day, and it'll be done. I've even heard somebody say, do you know what, before I listened to your podcast, I thought a value proposition could be just whipped up in an afternoon. And then I sent it on to my manager, who signed it off, and it was done, job done. But then listening to the podcast, I realized that actually value is the center of a business model. And you don't just do a value proposition, across the board for a category or, just across various, segments. You have to do it by product. And if you've got like thousands of different products, the question, how do you get your head around that sort of thing? Because pricing, in a sense, it's becoming very granular. It's becoming very specific, but highly connected to a lot of different, information and data sources and analytics. But at the same time, very specific when it comes down to optimizing pricing. And this here is sort of the epiphany that people have kind of when they listen to this podcast, is across each of those different segments that I discussed. And from that, we get to, great conversations with people about their unique challenges, because although we touch, broadly on what pricing is, it's only when you get, speaking about different business models, unique challenges that, our customers have, that you can then really pinpoint the exact pricing methodology, the right approach for their business, the right model, and the right I suppose the right integration of data and information sources that they need to produce that optimal price and pricing strategy.
Yeah. I'd also say, I suppose, just the style of how we do the podcast, like it's not very technical. We're not focusing on technical detail. We're not telling you algorithms, x plus 3 minus 6 divided by. If we started doing that, it would be bizarre, and I don't think this is the format for that. The method of pedagogical methodology, is that a word for teaching? So I don't think it's the right approach for that. I think podcasting is something you probably listen to in the peripheral background while you're walking your dog with headphones, or when you're driving the car and the school run, etc., on the way back. That's probably when people, I assume, are listening to the podcast. And it's got to, it's more of I suppose we're building a community, we're building that background knowledge, we're sort of probably telling people to be thinking about pricing, about commercial strategy, and, obviously with the core focus on pricing is where it's at. But so I think probably the growth for our potential growth is in two areas. It's probably that startup, small business owner concept, one, and I think two, it is probably more general management, more C-suite, more senior commercial managers, potentially even financial people want to move into more of a commercial approach. And I divide those two lines, financial. So I think probably what we'll do with the podcast is, we're suggesting we'll do some advertising on other podcasts, which I believe is a good way to grow. And, probably we'll focus on those sort of podcasts, startup, small business, commercial strategy, because I think probably that's the most adjacent sectors that probably people will be willing to listen to. Like, I don't think, probably sports or, that sort of stuff, people aren't going to listen to this stuff. So they're not certainly our core audience. But I think that's where the growth will be outside of the core, pricing community.
It's interesting when you say that, because when you look at our consulting business, people do want to know about pricing applied to a certain problem or a certain industry, and I think we've even touched upon this sort of stuff in our own podcasts. But in terms of growing the podcast, I agree. And I would say this even to my clients: you've got to think about adjacencies. Look at the data, which we have done in terms of our podcast. Look at the outliers and look at the mode and where the clusters are falling, and we've noticed those clear segments of listeners. So we'll do our best to think about pricing according to their needs, because again, what we're trying to do here is to give our listeners value and to really address specific, well, maybe not a specific, but problems that they're thinking about, and we need to articulate them for them and have that conversation that potentially is sort of on the top of their mind, and they're thinking, what is that? Am I right in thinking this? And that's the sort of epiphany moments I think Aidan was talking about. Yes, absolutely, certainly you are right, and we would like you to continue thinking about that. And when we ask for questions and feedback, really, feel free to give us that feedback, because that will only help us, refine the podcast and to really address the needs that and challenges that you're facing today. Yeah, so I appreciate you listening, and as I said, feel free to contact us and give us your questions. More than happy to find out what that is. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, or if we're completely wrong, just tell us. All right, thanks then. Bye.